The anatomy of mental drift. Right now, your physical body occupies a single point in space, yet your attention is likely marooned somewhere else entirely. You are technically present, but a fractured segment of your mind is already rehearsing a conversation that hasn't happened, relitigating an argument from a decade ago, or defending yourself to an empty room. If you catch your mind at a random interval, you will find it is almost never in the room with you. The body remains in the chair while the psyche quietly books a flight to next week without mentioning it left. This relentless internal simulation is what we call thinking, an analytical mechanism we take immense pride in. We celebrate the sharp, hyper-vigilant mind that runs 3 steps ahead and never fully switches off, completely blind to the fact that this exact mechanism is what quietly removes us from our own lives. The mirage of completion. We spend consecutive years waiting for our real life to begin, assuming it will arrive after a specific project concludes, when a chaotic season passes, or once our schedule finally settles. Yet, when the milestone is achieved, the finish line politely moves, and the promised peace remains exactly one achievement out of reach. It is easy to blame external circumstances, attributing the delay to workloads, calendars, or demanding people. In reality, the destination you have been trying to reach your whole life is the very ground you are standing on while thinking about somewhere else. The deeper, stranger question beneath this cycle is simple. What does this exact moment actually look like when you stop narrating it and turn the commentary off? The illusory fight for silence. Most people have no concept of a world without mental commentary, not because they are incapable of finding it, but because they believe the internal narrator is never allowed to pause. When you attempt to force the mind to be quiet through sheer willpower or rigid meditation, the thoughts only seem to multiply, leaving you convinced your brain lacks an off switch. It doesn't, but chasing silence by fighting the noise directly is a losing battle that only causes the room to get louder. Reaching the space beneath the noise has nothing to do with forcing an inner monologue to stop. What lies underneath is not a hollow, blank silence, but a vivid state of presence that lives in the half-second before a thought forms, a narrow gap where the world stops being a story you tell and becomes a place you actually inhabit. The quantifiable cost of absence. In 2010, Harvard researchers utilized an invasive smartphone application to track thousands of people globally at random intervals, asking 3 simple questions. What are you doing right now? What are you thinking about? And how do you feel? The resulting 250,000 data points revealed a devastating reality. Humans spend 47% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they are actually doing. We eat lunch while planning dinner and shower while relitigating past conflicts, present in body, yet utterly absent in fact. Crucially, the data proved that a wandering mind is a measurably less happy mind, regardless of where it drifts. Even when the mind wanders toward pleasant daydreams or fantasies, people remain less content than those who are simply present. The leaving itself is the ultimate cost. The mechanics of the default setting. If mental drifting causes such pervasive discontent, we must confront the evolutionary design flaw. Why does the brain spend half its waking life somewhere other than where its body is? When neuroscientists imaged the brain during these drifting intervals, they expected to find an organ winding down and resting. Instead, they discovered a highly active, energy-consuming network that fires up the exact instant we stop focusing on an external task. They named this the default mode network. It engages automatically the moment you stop reading, working, or talking, generating a low background hum of internal dialogue. Most people mistake this restless internal narration for their core identity, the thinker at the center of the self, without realizing it is merely a specialized biological system running on its factory setting. The architect of the narrative self. The default mode network does not merely produce random mental clutter. It systematically stitches your yesterday to your today and your imagined tomorrow, calling the resulting continuous timeline, you. Neuroscientists refer to this as the narrative self, an autobiographical construct built entirely out of memory, projection, and comparison. This narrative engine is undeniably useful for planning careers, learning from mistakes, and maintaining human societal structures. However, its defining limitation is that it literally cannot exist in the present moment. Its entire operation depends on pulling the past forward and pushing the future back. By the time the narrator formulates a description of now, the live edge of reality has already slipped into the past, meaning you are forever experiencing a description of life rather than life itself. The awakening of the experiential pathway. A profound alternative to this bleak narrative loop was mapped in 2007 by researcher Norman Farb and his colleagues, who scanned brains as individuals shifted their internal focus. When participants reflected on their traits and personal histories, the familiar story machine lit up. But when they were guided to focus exclusively on raw, immediate sensory data, the physical sensation of a breath, the weight of the body, the immediate instant without words, a completely separate pathway engaged. Experiential focus. These two pathways operate on a system of mutual inhibition. When the narrating network is loud, the experiential network goes completely dark. Because modern adults exercise the narrative muscle exclusively, we become extraordinarily fluent in dissecting our experiences intellectually, yet entirely illiterate in simply having them. Productive execution versus idle churn. The analytical mind fiercely defends its hypervigilance, arguing that constant thinking is required to handle real-world responsibilities, solve complex problems, and protect investments. This defense rests on a massive misconception, the belief that thinking about a problem is identical to working on it. True problem-solving is a deliberate, finite act with a clear beginning and end. You focus, evaluate the options, reach a definitive conclusion, and set the tool down. The vast majority of everyday thinking behaves nothing like this. Instead, it circles the same small loop of worries like a tongue returning to a sore tooth, burning massive amounts of metabolic fuel in neutral without moving the car a single inch forward. The addictive illusion of control. This exhausting cognitive spin thrives in two primary gears: rumination about the past and worry about the future, both of which masquerade as responsible behavior. Chronic rumination is falsely labeled as learning from mistakes, yet it reliably produces nothing but deeper anxiety, keeping past wounds open and lit long after the lesson has been extracted. Worry disguises itself as preparation, yet it does not protect you from a negative future. It merely forces you to suffer a simulated catastrophe ahead of time, paying a heavy emotional tax for a bill that rarely arrives. The mind compels us toward this loop, because the act of churning produces an addictive illusion of control over a situation we cannot actively change, treating more thinking as the cure, when it is actually the disease. The horizon trap and the loss of resolution. When your mind treats the present moment purely as raw material, or a stepping stone toward a future milestone, you slide into an inescapable trap. You push through school for the job, grind through the job for the promotion, and use the weekday to buy the weekend, entirely unable to exhale when you finally arrive. Because your mind is structurally conditioned to remain elsewhere, it erases the finish line the moment you cross it, immediately scouting the next objective to chase. While you live inside this flat, compressed summary of postcards, reducing a vibrant morning to a checklist of kitchen coffee running late, reality continues to broadcast at full, uncompressed sensory resolution completely unwitnessed, dismantling the myth of boredom. The hyperactive mind frequently resists presence by labeling it as boredom, dismissing a life of raw sensory tracking as passive, thin, and unsuited for an ambitious individual. This is a profound misunderstanding. Boredom is not an organic property of the world, but a direct byproduct of the narrative self. When you walk down a familiar street and feel checked out, the street itself is not boring. It contains an entirely unique arrangement of changing light, moving air, and fresh details. The boredom occurs because your analytical mind pulled up a stored file, stamped it, already known, and swapped the live broadcast out for a stale mental rerun. Children are captivated by simple things because they have not yet learned to exchange the raw signal of the world for its text summary, the absolute unreality of time. To break free from the narrative grip, you must confront an architectural truth that the analytical mind will fiercely contest. The past and the future do not exist as physical places. They are exclusively thoughts assembling themselves inside the theater of the present moment. The childhood you remember is not an intact structure behind you. It is a memory trace reconstructing itself now. The disaster you dread is not waiting ahead. It is an imaginative projection occurring now. You have never lived a single second of your life in the future, nor will you ever. Reality exists entirely on the live edge of this exact instant, and when the narrative clock stops ticking, you do not lose your place. You simply land where you always were. The burglar guarding the house. The primary reason people understand this philosophy yet remain trapped behind the glass of thought is that they attempt to achieve stillness through effort. You cannot stop thinking by trying to stop thinking, because the trying itself is a conceptual thought. Using the mind to escape the mind is equivalent to asking the burglar to guard the house, or sending fire to extinguish fire. When you sit down with a rigid determination to think nothing, the inevitable arrival of a thought triggers a wave of frustration, which is itself another thought. You quickly end up entirely tangled, deploying the exact analytical material you are fighting against, and forcing the mental engine into an even higher gear. The mechanical power of simple noticing. True mental quiet belongs to a rare category of states like sleep that cannot survive the presence of effort. If you lie awake at 3 a.m. demanding that your body sleep, the strain of your willpower guarantees total alertness. Sleep arrives only when you abandon the campaign and let go. The quiet mind functions precisely the same way. It is not a trophy you achieve, but a natural state that appears the moment you stop trying to manufacture it. The entire mechanism rests on a deceptively simple shift. Noticing. You do not fight, judge, or argue with a thought, nor do you try to swap it for a positive one. You simply register the cold, objective fact that thinking is currently happening in the room. The half-inch of total freedom. The exact millisecond you notice a thought, a profound mechanical shift occurs in your brain architecture. A moment prior, you were completely fused with the thought, standing inside the worry, and seeing the entire world through its distorted lens. The instant you calmly register its presence, a sliver of distance opens up. There is now the passing thought, and there is the awareness observing the thought. That tiny half-inch of psychological distance constitutes the entirety of human freedom. You have not violently forced the worry to vanish, but because you are no longer submerged within it, you are finally granted the space to choose whether to pick that thought up or simply watch it pass by. The great inversion of human performance. The analytical mind harbors a deep, quiet dread that if it turns down its anxious churn, it will lose its competitive edge, drop its ambitions, and go soft. To dismantle this fear, you must look at where your actual moments of peak performance and absolute excellence have originated. Whether in sports, complex creative writing, or high-stakes corporate execution, your finest hours never occur while the narrator is anxiously commenting on your performance. They occur in a state of absolute absorption, flow, where the self vanishes, the inner critic goes silent, and your trained, intelligent capacities act with fluid precision. The very analyzing mind you are terrified to quiet is the exact mind that chokes under pressure and sabotages your innate genius the moment it grabs the controls, reclaiming the position of the listener. This realization shifts the entire landscape from a question of mental technique to a fundamental inquiry into identity. Who have you taken yourself to be your entire life? You have naturally assumed you are the voice in your head that worries, plans, and judges. Yet if you can hear that internal monologue, it dictates a structural truth. The speaker and the listener cannot be the exact same entity. There is the thinking, and there is the silent awareness that knows the thinking is occurring. You have spent your entire life frantically playing the role of the speaker, completely neglecting the unmoving, silent listener that sits in the background, the only position that was ever truly yours. The continuous practice of arriving. Transitioning into a present life is not a dramatic, one-time awakening that permanently erases the inner voice. Tomorrow morning, the old autobiography will reassemble itself out of pure habit. The worries will line up, and you will get lost in your head for hours. This is not a failure of the practice. The act of wandering is what provides the weight required to build the muscle of awareness. The transformation is incredibly quiet. You simply start catching yourself a little sooner, stepping back from the spiral after 20 minutes instead of 2 hours. By anchoring yourself as the steady, witnessing observer, rather than the chaotic narrative show, the engine finally drops into neutral. The whip of anxiety falls away and your actual life begins.